Hey all, how you doing today? Usually whenever these new games come out, I like to crowdsource a bunch of information to help formulate a tier list, but since the game already had a soft launch, there's a handful of people that already have a lot of experience in the game, and their accounts are nearing end game, so what we can do is learn from their mistakes so that we don't have to repeat those same mistakes. This is a Mythic Heroes Global Guide for the Heroes made by Leffy. The creator of the guide is found on Discord, so if you want to add him in Discord giving him a shout out or a thanks, I'm sure they would appreciate it. Why should I listen to you? Honestly, you don't have to, but crowdsourcing more information and getting more points of view is going to help us accurately get to our end game tier list, so we're going to take everything they say and take note of it. What makes this guide different from all the other tier lists around? This tier list isn't going to be assigning a hero an overall tier. I will let you know what they are good at. Please note that this is my opinion and feel free to use this as a guide. If you disagree with the numbers, that's okay. It's going to be updated whenever they have time, and if you don't agree with any of the units on the list, as mentioned before, the guide is based off the creator's opinion. If you disagree with the rating, that's fine. Everybody has different experiences. I'm sure whenever this person was raising their characters and also seeing other characters in action, they weren't all fully built. So remembering that the beginning of the game, wildly different than the middle of the game, wildly different than the end of the game, which is where this person apparently is. There's a bunch of different sections to grade these characters, and that's what they've rated them in with a 1 to 10 number. I went ahead and made an additional glossary and legend in the top right corner. Since all of the units are graded in different categories, there's 6 total categories. If a unit ranks highly in every category, it's going to up their total of points. 55 to 60 points gets an S, 50 to 55 is an A, and so forth. So that's going to cover the glossary, and last is just a little bonus question: who should I use or level? When you start, you will use the unit you have the most ascended copies of, which is true. If you want to build a specific unit, but the game hands you multiple copies of a different SSR that you're not too fond of, it might still be worth ascending them because the power creep that they're going to get from being ascended is going to outweigh the performance of whatever character you have that's not as built. The first one is going to be Lucifer. He's a UR, which means he's a pay-to-win unit. His type of damage is physical. He seems to be relatively good in everywhere in the game. All of his stats added up together equal 55, which is going to put him in the S tier. His recommendation for runes seem to be the ones that increase your ability of spammability or the damage total overall. The artifacts being recommended are the ones that can also decrease his cooldowns or increase the effectiveness of his auto attacks. He specializes in area of effect crowd control, and he's a dodge bruiser. Lucifer is probably the best UR out at the moment. He has solid damage with great area of effect ultimate, which also stuns the enemies. With lifesteal in his weapon and dodge in his skill, Lucifer is very self-sufficient and can fit anywhere in a team comp. Do note, since he is hard to raise due to duplicates being hard to get, his power score might not seem high whenever you are mid to late game. I definitely don't recommend building these URs, especially if you're not free to play, because even I myself have a couple duplicates of him, but I know better than to start building him, because while he might be very good at first, he's going to fall off whenever I'm not able to upgrade him anymore because I don't have enough duplicates to ascend him. Athena is going to be a free-to-play tank, and she's totaling about 48 points with a point system, which would land her in the B tier. But it is particularly important to notice what she's bad in, which would be bosses, and bosses are a very big milestone for a lot of the rewards that you get in the game. Her recommendations for runes are going to be ones that increase her tankiness or help her get cooldowns faster. Her artifacts are ones that help mitigate damage. Athena is like the best friend you want when you enter a fight. She keeps soaking up all the damage, and with dodge on the weapon, she can tank more than some units can based on RNG. When you get her ult off, it usually bites enough time for your healer to keep everyone alive. Artemis is a free-to-play damage dealer, coming in at 50 points, landing her just at the A rank. Her suggested runes are ones that increase damage or ones to reduce cooldowns of her abilities. Queen of DPS. When left alone, her damage is the highest. With a maximum % of damage on her weapon skill when you crit, she hits like a truck on bosses. She does suffer from the fact that she dies easier, which makes it harder to live in campaign, but if you build up a team to protect her, she will pave the way to victory for you. The opposite of what we just said about Athena, how we said that she's not going to be good for bosses and bosses are very important, Artemis is going to be very, very good for bosses, because usually bosses don't have ways to focus the ranges, so she is just free to sit back there pulling all of her arrows, doing all of the damage that she can do, and getting off every cast. Since the bosses are time gated, being able to do as much damage as possible is really important, so that's just something important to keep note of. Susano, also a physical free-to-play damage dealer, pulling in at just 50 points. Barely scraping into A tier, his sets are the same recommendations as Artemis's. I'm going to go ahead and also point out a discrepancy with them having the same builds real quick. Susano is melee and Artemis is ranged, so even though they're both damage dealers, they have wildly different things they need to look out for. Susano teleports directly into the enemy's battlefield, so you might also want to consider putting some survivability on him with his artifacts, which is why I'm saying to take things on a tier list with a grain of salt, because not everybody has the same amount of experience in every single character. With lifesteal at level 181 and on his weapon, he can self-sustain when doing lots of damage, but once you hit late game and everyone is synced to 300, Susano can no longer burst his opponent down. This causes him to die really quickly when he jumps to the back line. Dionysus is a supporter, coming in at 45, our first C tier, being recommended for sets that help increase the cooldowns and increase the energy regeneration rate with the artifact that also has a chance to decrease cooldowns. Debuffer. Dio is the main debuffer in this game. While his overall usage in campaign is low, he is a must-have for bosses. At some point you will get stuck in campaign. You will always do bosses part of your daily, so having a pocket Dio is handy for progression and you will always need him for farming bosses. Zeus landing in the B tier with 47 points as a free-to-play mage, recommended for runes that decrease cooldowns, increase energy, or deal more damage, and artifacts to increase damage and reduce cooldowns as well. Damage dealer with some CC support. Zeus's final skill comes with a percentage of current HP damage whenever he uses any skill. If you run cooldown reduction runes and artifacts, Zeus can spam his damage quite often, which makes his damage very noticeable in high target enemies. So like bosses with a huge amount of health or enemies with a lot of health for every cast he does, it's going to have a cap. You can't just do 1,000,000 damage to a boss with 1,000,000,000 health, but it's going to be a consistent way to ensure you're dealing high damage to those bosses with high health consistently. Lilith is actually going to be our pay-to-win F tier, coming in at a pathetic 34 points. Damage dealer. Someday she might be good. Honestly, the reason she is rated like this is due to being a UR. It's harder to max, yet there are plenty of good SSR mages that outdamage her in a campaign or boss, and in regular campaign she dies too easy late game. Even in a 30-second print, she still does less damage than Persephone. Persephone not quite making it to A, 1 point away from an A, but let's see what's going on with Persephone, the free-to-play mage. Damage dealer and utility. Persephone is like the unit you can't leave alone. If left unchecked, she will destroy your team with % current HP area of effect damage that comes from the weapon. Healing reduction is very good when you run into a level where you can't kill the units due to many units that heal. Her final skill also gives dodge to her teammates, which is an amazing buff, as this just might be the difference between clearing a level or not. She has great utility and a very good damage. All in all, that doesn't sound too bad. Also, if you're considering early game, that's really the one that you spend the least amount of time in. So being low rated in early game isn't really a big deal because you're only going to be in early game for probably honestly like a month. Izanami the best girl, also barely coming in at not quite an A, just at 49 points. Her ult allows her to self-sustain, making her a great unit to clutch it out for you in the campaign. She does not need to stack her ghost, and her weapon allows her to do more damage when less units are on the field. This means she does better when you survive the start. I'm using Izanami as my carry in the beginning of the game, and I'm noticing that she is able to outpace a lot of the other people I'm competing with free to play. Just her capability of sustain, so that whenever everyone else on your team has died, if all of the enemies are at least at half HP, she's able to use her ultimate and AoE all of them down and do a 1v5. Medusa in B tier with 48 points. She is a physical damage free to play character, recommended for sets that ignore defense or deal more damage, and also the artifact that increases effectiveness of auto attacks. With an auto attack that hits multiple people in a crowd control ult that keeps enemies in place, Medusa can easily turn a fight around. She also drains the enemy's ult gauge as well, but without her ult she is susceptible to dying quite easily as her lifesteal is pretty low and she can melt from area of effect spells. Hades, a free-to-play tank, coming in at a very underwhelming 44 points in the C tier, recommended for runes that increase survivability or increase the energy regeneration rate, and also the artifacts to help increase survivability. I'm noticing there are no comments on him, and there's also no comments on Anubis, who has the same build and nearly the same recommendations. I have Anubis, so I can comment on his early 1 to 15 game, but I don't have Hades built. I'm just going to take this as an opportunity to point something out that I'm noticing as a pattern. If multiple things are recommended for the exact same build, with there being so many different options and combinations that we can choose, that if it's not a unique suggestion, then I don't think the creator actually has a lot of experience with the characters. I just wanted to go ahead and get that off my chest because you can see some characters have a lot of very specific recommendations, but also no specialties or no comments. I do agree with the early game ranking on Anubis. Anubis is not a very good tank for early 1 to 15. Tanks in general in the beginning of the game seem to rely on being just that, as tanky as possible, and Anubis's kit doesn't really focus on him being tanky in the early game. But yes, Anubis certainly is underwhelming for the early 1 to 15 phase. Also, anybody that has information for Hades that just wants to leave it in a comment to help everybody out, please feel free to do so. Nuwa, a pay-to-win high rating character, coming in at a near whopping 53 points, almost an S tier but not quite, being recommended for runes that increase ability spammability or artifacts that increase team stats or help her cooldowns. Buffer and removing enemies of the field. Nuwa is a great buffer and utility unit. Her third skill allows her to remove a unit on the field. If you run cooldown reduction on her, you can make the fight a 5v4. This makes it very easy to climb in campaign, and you rely on the RNG that Nuwa keeps the same unit out of the game. Guji and Mo, the 51 points A tier, recommended to ignore defense, decrease cooldowns, or increase damage, but the artifact is going to be the one that increases auto attack effectiveness. A dodge tank in the first form, and then a damage dealer. GM is the king and queen of early game. In the first form, you have a dodge which allows the front line to tank units. After you activate your ult, you do a big burst that does quite a bit of damage in the early and mid game. What makes GM amazing is the weapon skill. When you ult, you can get up to a 100% attack speed buff, and with the critical damage buff from the second form, GM hits like a truck for a few seconds. Also, the weapon allows you to ult twice so you can get the attack speed buff again. Joan of Arc, the free-to-play support, putting in a not so impressive points at 43, landing her in the C tier. And also worth noting that this is the first unit recommendation that I have seen this rune being recommended. The guide on this character in particular does seem to have a lot of information, so it is possible that this was on their team. These are artifacts that all increase survivability, and the last one also helps spam abilities. Support off tank. Her ult can save your DPS from dying and make sure you can complete the level. She also brings an attack buff, which makes her useful for bosses. Joan does suffer from being squishy at the start with her dash skill. She can just go in and die. But once you up her weapon and divinity, she can be as tanky as some of the defenders. Her weapon style provides magical resistance, and she's usually best to tank against teams that have a lot of magical damage. At the moment, at weapon 400, her ultimate is shielding the 2 lowest people, when it's meant to shield the 1 lowest and herself. If this is not a bug, she is 9 or 10 at late game. So putting her at a 9 or 10 at late game would at least put her in the B tier. There don't seem to be comments on the next 4 characters, so I'll just go over their builds and then I'll provide commentary if I have any commentary. Hercules, I also recommend these earth runes because it is very important for his survivability. And for artifacts, if you're still having trouble surviving in the front line, or maybe if you don't want to move him to the back line, then these artifacts would be recommended. But I am actually having a lot of use with the axe. Being able to increase his auto attack damage makes him more of a bruiser, and he does deal a decent amount of damage. Lubu is being labeled as a C at 42 points, a free-to-play physical damage dealer with a wide array of recommendations. Cleopatra sitting in a B at 48 points, a free-to-play caster, also recommended for dealing damage, increasing her health regeneration or increasing energy regeneration, and artifacts that increase cooldowns or damage. If you have any particular experiences or comments on Cleopatra, please feel free to leave that in the comments. An I set, I'm not even going to go for it. If he doesn't even know, I don't even know. Gaia barely cut it in at C with a rough 40 points. A free-to-play tank recommended for runes to help increase survivability and artifacts to do the same. Physical resistance tank and area of effect crowd control. Gaia has it rough early. She doesn't do much at the start, but when you unlock her 300 on weapon, it makes her area of effect stun as well. Her ult reduces enemy attack speed and stuns the whole team practically. When she gets this off, she gets a lot of breathing space to her team. With physical resistance on the weapon and self-sustain when crowd controlled, Gaia is one of the tankiest units versus physical enemies. Tanamo, the free-to-play mage, sliding solidly into the A tier with a good 51 points. Recommended to increase her damage, decrease her cooldowns, or increase her energy regeneration rate for equipments. Assassin damage dealer. Let Tanamo carry you. Tanamo knows best. Quote from Nuwa Asura, who is a mod. Okay, well. Nagakena, a free-to-play healer at a solid 50. Recommended to increase her healing effectiveness, reduce her cooldowns, or boost your teammates' stats. She is a healer, a great healer. Item might be better with early energy regeneration. Naga scales really well into late game as she has overhealing and shield. This really helps not getting one-shot by enemies. Healing is ineffective when you are dead. Healers are so wildly important for different areas of content that even if you didn't have one on your main team, I would highly recommend having one on your benches. Which leads us to Adbone, the A tier 50-point healer. With the same recommendations as the previous, she is a great healer. Idun has a great area of effect heal as well as energy regeneration. She will always keep your units topped up. She falls off late as she can't mitigate damage, which means some members might get one shot. If they die, having all the heals won't help. And lastly is Oberon, a character with no comment, coming in at C tier with 43 points. There are all sorts of different recommendations to build him, so if somebody has them on your team, as always, feel free to express in the comments your sympathies towards the character or your gripes against them. And that covers all of the heroes. Again, remember that this list was provided to us by Leffy from the Discord, so please go in there and thank them for the list. It obviously took them a lot of time that they did not have to devote to helping us, which they did, so that's very nice and we are very appreciative. Thank you so much. Maybe in a few months, whenever a few more people have some chances to get experience under their belts, then we'll have some more versions of tier lists to help compare. But that's going to do it for this one. If you have any questions, feel free to join the Discord. Just do not be sensitive in there because we have a bunch of different people from all sorts of different games that just like to have fun. But other than that, y'all, that's going to do it for me today, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.